see the recording. I want to start with acknowledging the land we're on and invite you to think of the land that you're on and joining us from. Our head office is located on the sacred land that has been the site of human activity for over 15,000 years. This land is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, and the Wendat. It's now home to many diverse peoples. We acknowledge that the City of Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississauga of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississauga and Chippewa bands. We acknowledge these nations and any other recorded or unrecorded First Peoples who care for the land as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land named Takarondo, where the trees meet the water or the gathering place. As settlers, we entered into an agreement to share this land equitably. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous people must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. We're grateful for the opportunity to work with communities on this territory. And I'd like to introduce you all to Dr. Chantal Regis. She is a registered psychologist with a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Guelph. Her area of practice includes children and adolescents. Dr. Regis works as a psychologist for the Durham District School Board and provides therapy in private practice in the Greater Toronto Area. She previously worked as a staff psychologist at the Peterborough Regional Health Service and Ontario Shores Centre for Mental Health Services, Adolescent Outpatient Clinic. Her therapeutic orientation integrates aspects of cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, play therapy, and dialectical behavioral therapy. And she's worked with SMSK for several years and is passionate about promoting resilience and self-care. We've also got Dr. Michael Saxon joining us. He is a clinical psychologist working in children's mental health in Ontario. Currently, Michael is a staff psychologist at Kinark Child and Family Services, working with children and adolescents through the Community Mental Health Program. In addition, he is an associate at Bellefonte Psychological Services, which is a private practice in the Greater Toronto Area that provides both therapeutic and assessment services. Prior to his current positions, he gained experience providing psychological services for youth and families in contact with the justice system, as well as in hospital and school settings. Therapeutically, Michael draws heavily from cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy. Dr. Saxon also maintains a research practice on the impact that domestic violence has on families and the community response to violence. And lastly, but definitely not least, we have Matthew joining us. He is 20 years old and is in the college, is at college for Foundations in Art and Design this September. He's begun. He also has interest in the arts as well as environmentalism and would like to pursue both of these interests in the future. So with all that being said, I will turn it over to our experts to speak to you today.
Thank you, Pamela, for that lovely introduction. Mike, I'm so excited to be here with you talking about validation today. We did a webinar once before and it was a lot of fun. So I'm happy we're going to get a chance to chat today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's nice to be back with you as well. So it's a pleasure.
I figured I'd start off for everybody today by explaining what is validation. The name of our talk is One Caring Adult, the Power of Validation. So why don't we start off by just saying, like, what is validation? There's just lots of different definitions, but I think the one that's the most helpful is just understanding that validation is when we communicate, either verbally or non-verbally, to another person that what they're feeling, their thoughts, their actions, it's understandable from their perspective. It makes sense. So, you know, for example, if it's 7 o'clock and I'm really cranky and snapping, you know, someone in my house will say, it makes sense that you're cranky. You haven't eaten dinner yet. You get cranky when you haven't eaten dinner. Go eat something, please. Right? They validated, named my feeling, give me a reason that it makes sense that I feel that way. Can't talk about validation without invalidation. I think, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, but I feel like we invalidate each other way more than we validate each other day to day. Invalidation is the opposite. It's when we communicate to somebody, intentionally or not, through our words and our actions, that what they're going through makes no sense. What you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're doing in this situation makes no sense. Why are you behaving this way? What's wrong with you? Things like that. We communicate to the other person that what they're doing is manipulative, stupid, it's an overreaction, it's not worth my attention, it's not worth my time. And we do this to people all the time. I wonder, we're talking today about caring adults. We hope we have a lot of caring adults attending today. What do you think makes one caring adult such a big difference in this context here, Mike?
That's a good question. I think fundamentally it's recognizing that, kids are learning. And so their entire existence is learning about themselves, the world, how they fit in that world. And so part of that learning really comes from a caring adult modeling and helping them through trusting relationships and just being part of their life. So if you have one caring adult, that can make a world of difference in how a youth comes to understand not only themselves, but how they interact with the world. And oftentimes that validation is really the foundation for much of that learning. And that's why if you can have one caring adult who's actually aware of this and being a part of this, you can fundamentally shift things for a kid as they develop. That's what I'd say in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, sounds good. Sounds good.
So in terms of levels of validation, if you look at the dialectical behavior therapy literature, there's always these levels that are quite consistent. So Chantel and I kind of amalgamated them down to really pinpoint some key levels to think through. And just so we can start to think about, how do we be intentional around using validation as a tool and recognize how important it is in relationships that we fostering with anyone we work with, but especially with youth. The first really is the most basic. It's just essentially being awake and alive, and that you're really being present and being interested in the person that you're interacting with. And part of that is having some active listening pieces. So, basically, the person you're interacting with, that means making eye contact, putting down your phone, which is hard for even me, but just being present and demonstrating that through nonverbal pieces. It might just be nodding, it might be smiling. Really, the shortcut to have in mind is the I see you approach, that all you want to do is recognize that that person is there, you're engaging with them, and that you're giving them your attention. And that can be a fundamental piece to everything. And that's why it's the first level of anything. It's just being aware and being present with them. And it could be as simple as saying, hello, what's up? Just always having that in mind. That's the first one. The second one is really just taking on this curiosity. And part of that validation is looking to get an understanding or clarity around what's going on for the person, for the youth, what's their perspective. So really it's that shortcut of understanding, okay, what am I missing? If we can always strive to have that stance of, okay, this curious stance of, what am I missing right now? Help me understand. And that is a fundamental step to continue to validate and continue to look for things that are valid that you can validate. And the last one that we have here is a bit of amalgamation of two, but it's looking for things that are valid based on their history or just general circumstances. So really, it's about expressing that their experience is understandable given their previous past, their previous experiences, be it their age, their history, their biology, their social setting, their social interaction, their social history, that all these things go together to make sense why they are experiencing a certain thing at that time. So again, that shortcut of it makes sense for you because this has happened. So a simple example would be if a kid's really fearful of riding a bike that day because they had a fall yesterday, it makes total sense that you're worried about riding your bike today because of that fall you had yesterday. So really connecting those two. The second one is really about the circumstances. So it makes sense given that anyone would experience that. So it's really validating to say, given what's going on for you right now, anyone would feel that same thing in that situation. So it makes sense because everyone feels that way. You know, public speaking is a really good example of that. So kiddos really fearful of, you know, going and doing a presentation the next day and they want to avoid. It makes total sense that you're worried about giving this presentation to your class. Most people feel really, really worried about public speaking. That's a really normal thing, right? So it makes sense given all of that experience. When you think about this, it makes intuitive sense. It's like, oh yeah, this, you know, totally makes sense. This is what we do, but we sometimes forget or overlook. So I'm actually kind of curious, Chantal, if you think about where people can start, where caregivers or parents can start, where do you think is a good starting point for people to think through and use these validation levels in their own kind of life? And how do we implement or practice this?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that. I know we have, you know, adults of all different types of training and such listening today, some who are therapists, some who are definitely not therapists. And sometimes it feels a bit intimidating to kind of do this. And I wrote down as you were talking, awake and alive, like literally just be there, making eye contact, put down your phone. You're validating the person that you're talking to. So what I like about this is, you know, anybody can jump in as long as you're awake and alive. I like that. I might steal that, Mike.
Well, it makes sense, right? But think about how easily we are multitasking all the time in the world that we live in. There's so many distractors that sometimes we just forget these simple things can be so powerful. So absolutely.
And it actually fits because I'm thinking, you know, we talked, these are all the places you can jump in. I thought I'd spend a little time talking about why jump in, why try this validating, why caring adults should try this. And there's lots of reasons to take the time and effort to validate young people when you're talking to them, or, you know, adults in your life. It doesn't even have to just be young people, but we know that hearing how you feel makes sense actually helps to reduce one's nervous system arousal. Your heart rate slows, your stress response calms down. Just hearing what you're going through makes sense. It also gives children and adolescents the language on how to do it for themselves the next time. So kids go through life and they're experiencing things for the first time all the time. They don't always know, is this normal? But even if it is, how do I talk to myself about it? So when we validate, hey, it's okay that you're worried about jumping in the pool. Lots of people are nervous about jumping in the deep end. You got this. The next time they're nervous about something, they have language for that, right? Oh, makes sense. I'm nervous right now. Lots of people feel nervous. And I think most importantly, why adults should take the time to do this is it really builds trust and improves relationships. Kids know who's the adult that's going to get it, who's the adult that's going to see me, who's the adult that's going to tell me the thing that's going to help me tackle this problem. And building trust and improving relationships is how we continue to support youth in all places, home, school, work, everywhere. Now, I wonder if our audience is sitting there thinking, yeah, but what are the benefits to me? I get we want to help kids. What are the benefits to me? Spoiler alert, next slide, here we go. There are actually a lot of benefits for us to engage in validation of other people. My favorite one that I talk about a lot is when we stop to validate others, it gives us a chance to respond rather than react. If you are dealing with a very stressful young person and you can take that moment to just breathe, why is this child doing this? Are they hungry? Are they tired? Is it exam time? Is it a full moon? Whatever it could be, then you can react, you can respond rather than react. So it's not the what's wrong with you, it's the do you need to eat something? Do we need to sit down? Do you need a timeout? You can respond to the need. Helps us to reduce judgment towards the youth's experience. I find that we as adults, we forget very easily what it's like to be a kid or what it's like to be a teen. And it's really easy to be judgmental, right? Why are they all on TikTok? Why did they do this? Why did they do that? So that gentle curiosity, like you were talking about, having that, asking those questions helps us to reduce judgment, I think. And similar to respond and react, we can stay in the moment. I feel like as adults, we often get pulled, you know, but this is exactly what I'm talking about. You never clean your room. This is another example of that time that if we can just stay in the moment, what's happening in this context, in this moment for this child, it can help us to also be grounded. And, you know, relationships. We want our kids to talk to us. We want young people to tell us what's going on. We want young people to ask for help when they're in big trouble. And so being able to sit down and validate their experience, they'll come talk to us. And then we can do some collaborative problem solving. Let's talk about what we should do if everybody's vaping at the party. You're right. I'd be nervous too if I'm thinking everybody's going to be vaping and I don't want to try that. Let's talk about it. So I wonder, you know, what do you tell families when you're teaching this concept? Because I know you do this work often. And I wonder if, like me, you hear things like, well, I'm not going to validate that my kid, you know, broke the TV or that my kid stole his sister's cell phone. I'm not validating that. What do you tell families?
Well, first and foremost, I think there's always the validation of like, yeah, parenting is really, really hard and this stuff is really, really tricky. And especially in the moments when emotions are heightened, it's hard to be effective. And so it makes total sense that this is something that we're talking about. And then to your last point, I think the fundamental thing is to remember that we're only going to validate the valid. And part of that is thinking through that in an intentional way and recognizing that, you know, and just as a shortcut, all emotions are always going to be valid. There is no such thing as invalid emotions. Now, on the other side, there are valid and not valid action urges and actions. And that's where we start to kind of tease apart some of those pieces and really get in the weeds a little bit. And I mean, actually, this is a good segue to the next slide. Anyways, there are these real kind of core nuts and bolts, so to speak, ways to validate that kind of capture most of those things. First and foremost, it's always, as a caregiver, as a parent, as a professional, I'm included, slowing things down for ourselves, that we have to manage our own emotions before we start to jump in. And part of that is really being mindful of the moment, which takes a lot of practice, observing the experience, not only for kind of the kid or the youth that you're working with or who's in front of you, but also for yourself. And part of that is as we get, and these are kind of core mindfulness skills, but as we get more effective at recognizing how we're doing, we're far more likely to be validating towards what's going on around us. And like I said, critical piece is that we're always going to validate the valid. Really, when in doubt, validate the emotion. Emotions are always valid. Actions, urges, those sometimes can be invalid, but emotions are always valid. So we're always going to have that in our mind. So it makes sense that you're really mad. Most people are really mad in that situation. For your example, Chantel, it makes sense that, you know, you want this from your sister. You're disappointed that you didn't have that. You know, we can't go and hit that person. We can't go and take what is not ours, but we can validate the disappointment or the emotion that comes before a lot of those actions. A really important thing that we often say to parents, and it's so easy to do because I think caring adults have this urge to jump into problem solving. And part of it is to catch that urge, notice that urge, and just slow it down first so that we can actually have that curious stance and find out more, to get more, to help actually get a better understanding of what's going on. Because sometimes it's flying under the radar. You know, it might be on the surface, you know, I didn't do well on my math test, but then you find out actually there's some dynamics with peers that are driving a lot of, you know, these big worries. So part of it is giving your time or giving some time and space to actually start to find out that by being curious and validating the valid. And fundamentally, it's being realistic with expectations, right? Oftentimes we get attached to outcomes, but it's important to remember that youth are still learning not only to problem solve, but to regulate their emotions. Validation is really the grease in the gear of that learning. And so we have to really be aware of how our expectations might actually be leading to us being ineffective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm sitting here thinking again, like that idea of they're still learning to regulate their emotions. So that curious stance, the active curiosity, the listening, what's the context? Maybe I failed my math test not because I didn't study, but because my crush ignored me in the hallway.
Right.
And so jumping to problem solving about how you could have studied for the math test is not really addressing why I'm feeling this way, why I had this issue.
Absolutely.
Like,
It might
you know,
only turn up the
regulating my
volume.
emotions.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It
Yeah,
might turn up the volume of that emotion dysregulation, which then leads you to also become emotion dysregulated, and then we're feeling really ineffective and things go sideways really quickly. And so part of it is recognizing
absolutely.
you don't want to try that.
And, everything we've talked about today can be done by one caring adult. You don't need a team to do this. You can be one person that's connecting with one youth and making a difference by offering validation. And we're going to take some time to talk to a youth about that, I think, next.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we
Yeah,
shift over
cool.
to that?
Yeah, let's do that. Well, hi, Matt. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar and taking some time out to talk to some caring adults that have joined us today. We're hoping to chat with you today a little bit about your experience with a caring adult in your life. Perhaps you could start by sharing with us your story.
Sure. Do you want to start with my first school?
Sure, wherever you want to start.
So the first high school I went to was pretty big. I think it had like 1,000 students. It was a big school, and it was actually really overpopulated. And I did not like it, in case you could not guess. I did not do well.
The word overpopulated was a bit of a clue for me.
It was very overpopulated. There were times where you would be in the hall and you would stop moving, like you would be standing still trying to get to your class because it would be so congested.
Easy to
So-
get lost.
Yeah, get swept away in the current. It wasn't great, and I did drop out, I think was it 10th grade or 11th grade? It's whenever we went online for 2020. I think that was when I dropped out because I was basically failing all my classes. And I think it was about a year that I was out of school and I wasn't doing anything because I was so drained from that experience, I guess. I was not doing anything because I couldn't. And then it was my previous guidance counselor who contacted my mom and asked if I wanted to be a part of the alternative school. Which I said yes to because it would be nice to graduate. It'd probably be better than not graduating. So I said yes. And I went there, and it was only like, what, 6 months I was at the alternative school. It was like a complete turnaround. Like, I went from not being able to take the bus by myself to taking the bus like every day to and from.
It's awesome.
It was like
Yeah.
completely changed.
Sounds like you grew up a lot in that 6 months.
Yeah.
So when you think back to that, I mean, you mentioned a guidance counselor, but what about some other key pieces that were fundamental in you kind of growing and developing and feeling at a different spot compared to starting at that overwhelmingly overpopulated school to 6 months later?
Well, I wrote it in the letter. I don't know if I can talk about that, but I wrote in the letter about how because when I was back at my old school, it was sort of like if you were doing well and you weren't failing, but you also weren't doing like super well, like you aren't getting 100% on everything, you're just kind of coasting by. Like no one really, you're in the background, you know what I mean? Like no one really takes notice. So it's easy for people to sort of just be unnoticed in the background struggling.
Yeah, overlooked almost.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it sounds like you felt overlooked. You felt like people weren't looking, like paying attention or noticing you.
yeah. Well, and it wasn't necessarily the guidance counselor's fault because she had so many like people to take care of. I could barely get an appointment with her because she was like, yeah, I'm busy that day and I'm busy that day and I'm busy that day. So I really couldn't talk to her because she was so busy.
Yeah, and we were saying like at the new school, at the alternative school, what was it like? What was different? What were the adults like there?
Well, first of all, they all actually knew my name, which was nice. That was different. Um, and it was sort of like I was saying with the greetings in the morning. Like it's a really small thing, but it it really made me want to go to school. Like that small thing when you're in a difficult place is like the thing that gets you through the day. Like the only reason I was going to school was to hear some of those people say good morning to me, because that was like the best part of my day, was getting to hear good
Yeah.
morning from someone.
Which is pretty awesome when you think about going from like almost feeling overlooked to being seen, and people
Yes.
acknowledging you and acknowledging your presence and being present with you, and how powerful that can be in such a short period too.
Yeah, it was the acknowledgement that you're a human that exists.
Yeah, and also the idea of like it was so specific to you. They said your name. It wasn't a generic good morning to everybody or just good morning to everybody as they walked through the door. They actually called your name and saw you every day.
Yeah.
So when you think about the amount of time spent and how fundamental that was, you kind of mentioned it, those small things go a long way. Do you think there's some core pieces around just the fact that there are these adults who are actually in your corner, that felt like you had more motivation to actually continue to develop and improve in a way that's going to be supportive? So is it having people see you and also in your corner that's a part of it when you think about the caring adults?
Yeah, definitely. People who you know care about you, because when you know they care about you, it's easier to go and say, "Hey, I'm struggling with this." If it's someone who you've probably never met before, they barely know your name, you've never talked to them, you're not really going to go and start talking about all your personal issues with them, because you don't think they care, and some of them probably don't. So it just feels that much more difficult, especially for those people who are coasting by, who aren't used to being given that attention, to just say, well, they won't care anyways, so I won't tell them.
I wonder too about like academically, how did it make a difference going somewhere where you felt like adults cared? Because you made a point to say like you were failing everything before you switched school, or it felt like you were failing everything. So how did having caring adults around change your academics?
Um, well, I was doing, like, I always got okay grades, but in I think 10th grade, I got my first 60 and everything like shot downhill. Um, and I did fail out of like 3 classes in 2020 when we were online. And after I failed out of those 3, I was like, I'm just gonna drop out. Like I can't, because I can't, even if I were to keep going to classes, I would just fail them too, so there's no point. Um, and then when I went to DAS, it was sort of because you actually want to be there. It's a place that you're not like waiting to go home the entire day. Like it doesn't feel as much of a chore, I guess. It doesn't feel like you're running on empty all the time, because you're in a place you want to be.
Were there any adults in the building that noticed a particular interest that you had or encouraged you in a certain way, as opposed to that getting lost in the sea of all the students? Was there anybody that kind of connected with you about a particular interest? Maybe not, but I'm just wondering.
Yes, definitely. I'll try not to use his name. I'm so used to using his name. But my environmental science teacher, um, he asked everyone on the first day, does anyone actually want to be in this class? And I was the only one who said yes. And I told him about, like, I'm interested in birds, I'm interested in this, I'm interested in this. And he would come to school each day with like new stuff to tell me. Like he would want me to learn. He would encourage me to learn about what I wanted to learn about. And actually, he gave me a little clipping of binoculars because I didn't have any binoculars. So he gave me a little clipping of like these binoculars. So because he was trying to find some that were cheap for me because I was broke. I'm still broke, but less so. So he brought that in, and
Like a coupon, like to get it on sale,
No,
like a coupon. Is that what you mean?
like a clipping of he got it in like a newspaper,
Oh,
and
okay.
he was just showing me like the price and everything and where I could get it, and I was like, well, that's great, but I can't afford it. And he lent me a pair of his binoculars, his old binoculars, and he told me that if I couldn't afford them by the time I left the alternative school, that he would give them to me. Like he would just straight up give them to me. And first of all, I'd never had a teacher acknowledge me. So having a teacher actually give something to me, not necessarily like in a material sense, but in that encouragement, saying, you know, if this is what you want to do, pursue it. It was less so that he was giving something to me and more so that he was encouraging me, if that makes sense.
Totally. I think
Mhm.
that's where you talk through around, sorry, Chantel, around,
No, you go ahead.
you know, the showing of care and how that's
Yeah.
really a key piece of it, that they're investing in you in a demonstration of care, and how validating that is in terms of your own learning, to be like, oh, okay, people do want me to succeed by actually following things that I'm passionate about or interested in, and they're going to
Yeah.
support that. And that's a fundamental different than not being pushed to the side or not even being acknowledged or seen. This is like the total opposite of that.
Yeah.
Matt, you told like some really personal stories today and ways that people in your life connected with you. I'm wondering, this webinar is being broadcast to caring adults, all different kinds of fields and professions, and working with different kids across Canada. What would you tell the adults listening today about validating youth, connecting with youth? What would you tell the adults listening today?
I think really it is in the small things, like just acknowledging that you care about them and what they care about. Because a lot of the time in the school system, we just want you to pass and get out of here. But I think showing them that you actually care about what they're interested in, what they think they want to pursue, what matters to them, showing them that you care about that, I think is really important to encouraging them to pursue it. Because when you think that no one cares about what you want, you start not caring about what you want and just doing what everyone else tells you should be doing instead of what you want to be doing. So I would say just really try and get to know what it is they're interested in, what it is they need. Because just assuming what they need, or assuming that they just need to get past this one class and they just need to do this and they just need to do this, solving those little problems doesn't always get to the root of what they need, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense.
I think you very nicely summed up what we talked about earlier about knowing the youth's context. What is the context for this youth? And I think you really captured that. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I thank you. I think that's really well said, and impressive, the thoughts that you have and through your experience, and how much that small things has such a profound impact in such a short period for you when you think about where you are today, and what you had to go through to get here, and how that change has such a foundational shift in your life. And credit to all the work that you've done.
Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I guess, Mike, we'll take some questions now.
Yeah, sounds great.
Thanks, Dr. Regis and Dr. Saxton and Matt, for your fantastic insights. I think it's so key when we're all, as the caring adults ourselves, are so burnt out ourselves, to know that just a small thing makes the world of difference for the youth we're working with, in validating their experiences and supporting them. So thanks again, and yeah, we'll move into some questions. One question we have here is, what can caring adults, especially educators, do to create that relationship with the children and youth? So you kind of touched on those key factors. Is there anything that maybe we could expand on to really support our audience as they move forward with putting this into practice?
Yeah, one of the things that I thought about was learning your kids' names. Matt really touched on that a few times. Like, people just, they knew my name. I didn't feel so lost. And so I wonder, even something as simple as learning a child's name as a way to connect with them, or their nickname, even if that's something that they feel connected to, and remembering details. If it's, I'll be honest, sometimes I cheat. So when I work with kids, if something comes up, I'll like make a note somewhere of what K-pop band they like, because I'm not going to remember all the K-pop bands. So sometimes I cheat and I do write a little bit of a note, but I think it's the details for me. Your name, or one specific thing that you find interesting, or the name of the food you're eating for lunch, or something like that.
Really is that show of interest, right? If you have put the effort to show that you are interested, and that could just be literally putting your phone down and asking questions, like that interest goes a long way for many youth who feel often overlooked.
Awesome, thanks for that. Can you elaborate on the research and around why maybe it is just that one adult rather than needing a whole team of adults to support? I think really what this question is looking for is, how do you feel good about it just being the one adult rather than worrying that we need to create a full team around a child or youth?
And I don't know if it's one or the other. So I think both exist, and part of it is recognizing that, you know, the value of just having one supportive adult is really, really powerful. And if we're striving to have that in someone's life, it's really, really important. That's not to say that having more than one sort of supportive adult is like a negative. Obviously, it's very positive. So the more the merrier. And it's just recognizing that sometimes there's a diffusion of responsibility, or that we often can overlook, and the importance of just trying to strive to be that person. It can be really important, especially for educators who, you know, are part of these people's lives. And so yeah, I don't know if it's just one adult, but just minimally one adult, we should say, is fundamental.
I think that's it, right? Just understanding that yes, just the one is enough. You don't necessarily need to feel bad that you're the only one there. As long as you're there, you're helping. Awesome. Next question. How can we balance that validating based off of the history of working with or connecting with a specific youth without the risk of making those assumptions, especially when you're often hearing, well, you don't really understand what I'm going through?
I think that goes back to the idea of starting from a place of curiosity. So before you even jump to the context or the circumstances, or this makes sense, because you have to gather a lot of information. What's going on? Who was there? How did you feel? What's the meaning of that? So what if everybody, you know, clicks on your TikTok and then unclicks the likes, and the likes disappear? What does that mean to you? So that curiosity will give you the information you need to validate based on circumstance without assuming things.
And it's validating to hear, like, you're right, I don't understand, right? We will never understand someone else's experience, and we're trying to, right? So help us understand it through that curiosity. I think that's a good thing to have, because yeah, you hear it often, you don't understand. And we could push against that. And, you know, we don't fully, but we want to. And that is validating in and of itself.
I can think of myself saying many times, you're right, I don't get it. I'm not 17, but help me understand. I want to know what you're going through. So teach me.
Yeah, I think that's key, right? Recognizing that maybe we don't understand when it's been so long ago that we were in those shoes as well and things have changed.
I think
There's
that's how we also, oh, sorry, go ahead,
no,
Mike.
no, take it away.
I think that's how we also fall into invalidating. Like I was saying, we invalidate each other constantly all day long, right? Because we make those assumptions. Like, it's not that hard. You're 17, you have the energy of whatever. You don't need to, like, we do jump into those assumptions that will lead to invalidation. So it does take practice and being mindful and thinking about how can I pause and react instead of respond and ask those curious questions.
Mhm.
And that's exactly it, right? There's a freedom to letting go of like the need to understand or know or have the right answers, and just being able to say, yeah, I don't know and I don't understand. Let's figure this out together. And that sometimes is a really powerful moment, especially between, you know, an adult and a youth.
Awesome, thank you. Do you two have any suggestions for how to build capacity, maybe as an individual or within a team, to be better able at validating? I know with Matt, we heard that, you know, with certain schools, the numbers of kids to adults, it's just difficult. So any insight or suggestions you might have?
That's a really broad question.
Big one.
I mean, short of saying like let's invest all the money, but I wonder about, oh, people are going to hate this answer. Mindfulness, like practicing mindfulness, practicing meditation. We've heard it all before. But the more you can even just be present in the moment and realize that a youth needs to talk to you, or that they need to talk to you not in front of the whole class, like I need to step aside away from other people to connect with these kids, is one way to increase the youth's willingness to talk to you. If they know, okay, this is going to be noticed and this is going to be recognized, as opposed to I'm not going to be seen, like Matt spoke about. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a big question and a good question for that matter. And part of it is thinking through, for me, it's kind of twofold. One, it's recognizing the importance of championship within teams, and having, you know, certain individuals who are modeling and practicing that, and drawing attention to the work that they're doing by trying to build that within a team, and really, you know, being that champion for whatever you're trying to do within a system, which can be daunting and tiresome, but really seeing the value in that, and continuing to have a voice and push for that change can be really powerful. That said, I think, you know, it can get overwhelming very quickly. So picking small targets is always good. Like to Chantel's point, it's like, okay, you know, as a team, we're going to practice mindfulness, you know, a little bit more intentionally over the next month, and let's see how and talk it through, and have discussion around it. I think it just takes that one person to champion those things, and that can, yeah, it's a good question. It's a big question, but I think my take on would be modeling it, practicing it for yourself, and being a champion within teams can be really helpful.
I wonder too about capacity building around the idea that pull in more people who feel confident and comfortable being that one caring adult, working in the school system. I find sometimes it feels like it has to be your homeroom teacher, it has to be the vice principal, but maybe not. Maybe that one caring adult is, you know, the custodian, or the secretary or admin assistant in the front office. Like building everybody's comfort level to be that person that connects with that child in a way that's makes sense for where you work.
For sure. Oh, that's great. Another question we have is for those who may not see the value in validating a youth when discussing their perspectives, maybe for those adults that take that more authoritarian approach, what are your thoughts on getting those adults to take that different, more open-minded validation approach?
Honestly, it's a great question. I think part of it is, you know, and that's a lot of work that we do. It's the proof is in the pudding kind of thing. Like, let's test it. Let's see, do one and then the other, see what works, what doesn't. And let's see and get a really good understanding of, you know, what why we, and usually, you know, parents have their own experiences and their own, you know, experience from childhood that can kind of come into what they're doing today as parents, and getting an understanding of why we're being so attached to a certain way of approach, and then trying to see if the other one works as effectively or if not more. And by and large, over time, if you continue to practice, you start to be like, oh, this actually feels far easier, and we are moving in parallel. And so we can start to say, okay, so this seems like this might be a better option and it's more effective for you, as opposed to if we fall back and get stuck in the old way, we're going to continue to be stuck. So part of it is just really getting a good understanding of why we're attached to a certain way of parenting or approach, and trying to be a little more flexible in terms of that by practicing and having actual proof that this might be actually more effective in those moments for certain things.
I think this also speaks to the title of our talk, One Caring Adult. That's why we called it this, because if you can't get one parent to switch, if there's a second parent that is doing the validating, that's enough. If there's one adult at school, or a coach, or somebody that's being this validating one caring adult, that is enough to make a difference in a child's life. That's where that one caring adult comes from. We would love to be able to bring everybody around to being able to do this, but if they can't, and you're that one person that youth has, you're doing something, you're making a difference.
Awesome, thank you. I had one here. Trying to find it. You kind of spoke to it already, but maybe digging deeper into, you know, knowing how different kids have different experiences, really supporting them with that lens in mind, knowing that, you know, what one youth is going through, another might not necessarily react or feel the same stressors towards that same experience, or they might have a different experience that's causing anxiety or stress.
I think that goes back to someone who posed that question around assumptions. So we're careful around making assumptions, and that, like you said, people's experiences are all uniquely to their own. And so part of it is catching those assumptions and being curious and asking, okay, well, how are you feeling? And not if we're getting stuck in these assumptions and driving the questions through those assumptions, then we might be off. And so part of it is really being curious and being open to hear from youth around what actually is going for them, and believing that's their experience.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, great.
I think we have time for just a couple more questions. So do you have any tips on how to have a conversation with a young person after you've listened to their experiences, you validated them, but I guess as the adult, your perspective doesn't necessarily align with the youth's in a way to move forward? Do you have any suggestions on how to continue that conversation or continue supporting?
Like you sort of spoken about a way to collaborate and you don't agree. So yes, I want to go to the party. No, you can't go to the party. Is
that kind of thing? I think is what the question's asking. Yeah.
I think that speaks to the idea of, like, we know that kids benefit from high warmth but high structure. That's the evidence has shown that that's the way that kids can kind of foster their resilience, and one of the better, I don't want to say better, I'm adding judgment on it, but one of the parenting styles that leads to healthy outcomes is high warmth and high structure. So if I'm putting limits on a child, or I'm sort of saying, we've talked about it and we still don't agree, then, you know, I appreciate your perspective. I know you're disappointed. I know this sucks. This is not fair. I get it. I'm super sorry for you that you're having this rough time in childhood, and I'm the adult. You can't go to this party. Like, you can't go. It's not safe. I don't feel comfortable with you doing that. So the combination of high warmth and high boundaries can sometimes give you a way forward when you're not going to agree, because you're not always going to agree. Would you add anything to that, Mike?
No, that's just it, right? I think part of it is recognizing recognizing that kids are learning and they're learning through holding expectations and maintaining those consistent expectations. And it's not in a way that's often punitive because there's natural consequences that come from it. And we can do that in a validating way while not saying, okay, we don't want to make this kid so fragile that they can't manage all these big emotions, because we're helping them learn to manage these emotions by setting up these experiences, exactly what you're saying, Chantel, around, yeah, this is really crappy and I bet you're very disappointed, and this is the expectation. How do we move forward through this? There'll be next time, and having those conversations in a caring way, but not dropping expectations. I think that's where we can, it's a bit of a slippery slope, and really understanding what we're trying to do and being intentional around the learning that we're trying to foster for our kids.
Awesome. Well, I think one last question we can answer is, we have the slide with the references that I'm happy to share with the participants, but are there any other references that either of you can point to that might be or resources that might be helpful for our audience today? If you don't have them up to the top of your head, we could also share it in a follow-up as well.
I really like The Whole Brain Child. I think that one gives a good context for why kids are feeling the way they feel and reacting the way they react. So that one's a good one and it's written for the lay person. It's not super jargon heavy. When you're wondering, why is my child behaving this way, there's a lot of great neuroscience and brain development stuff in that book that explains child behavior.
I honestly, I couldn't agree more. That I feel like anyone who works with kids should read that book from all levels, or have kids, parents, everyone, because it's a great resource and a great book and a very easy read. And yeah, that would be my take. I would love for everyone to just get that copy just freely, because it is a good book.
It is a good book. I like The Adolescent Brain too, but that one's a little denser to get through, but that has a good overview of the brain development from like 12 to 24. That's a good one. The Adolescent Brain. I can't think of who the author is right now. It's a red cover. If you Google The Adolescent Brain, red cover.
Yep. So those titles could also be added in a follow-up email for everyone. The Adolescent Brain and The Whole Brain Child, I believe, is what you two suggested. Thank you both so much for your time and for your expertise. It's always great speaking with you two and listening to you as you share more and more. I have put a feedback survey in the chat for anybody who is interested in sharing. This just really helps us continue on with providing more timely and useful webinars. Also going to share my screen one last time, as we do have one more slide to share. So, we've heard a lot about the caring adult in a child's life and the importance of that. Our Kids Have Stress Too and Stress Lessons program really tie into the importance of a caring adult and support you as a caring adult in your work with kids. These psychology-based tools and strategies really help with that nurturing children and youth in helping form their resilience. We have also developed 2 new EDI modules. So really these modules help you in your work to deliver them in a more inclusive way. One is called Best Practices for Responding to Identity-Based Stressors, and the other one is called Communication in the Classroom. Both of these modules are provided for free as part of your order of the Kids Have Stress Too or Stress Lessons Guidebook. And participants today can download that guidebook for free, or sorry, 10% off using the coupon code Kids Have Stress Too, or KHSTSL10WEB. Again, that'll also be included in the follow-up email. But yeah, we're really excited to be able to offer this additional resource as you continue being that caring adult in a child's life. So thank you all again for your participation. Thank you, Dr. Regis and Dr. Saxon, for your time today. It is very much appreciated. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to contact me at my email provided. Thanks a lot. Have a good one, everyone.